So I've been aware only because of the terrible circumstances, regarding my uncle. He was murdered in his rectory as a direct result that many hundreds, if not thousands, believe, especially clergy in the Washington, D.C. area, of active clergy homosexuality in the rectory that he was tasked by the cardinal then to clean up.
By the way, my name is Joe McClane. I host a radio program called A Catholic Take, where we look at the world through a Catholic lens. I'd love for you to hang out with us. If you like it, give it a thumbs up and let us know what you think in the comments below.
Kevin Wells has an article over at Crisis Magazine, and it's challenging. It's insightful, in my opinion, but it's also a gut check in many ways. The rot in the church, you can still smell it, can't you? It hasn't really gone away.
Joe, it's always a pleasure to be on, even for subjects such as these.
I want to start with it must be difficult for someone like you, your family having suffered the way it did, to look at these USCCB meetings and not just be utterly disgusted by the lack of actual sincere effort to clean out the rot in the church.
So I've been aware only because of the terrible circumstances, regarding my uncle. That was 23 years ago, June of 2000, where he was murdered in his rectory. As a direct result that many hundreds, if not thousands, believe, especially clergy in the Washington, D.C. area, of active clergy homosexuality in the rectory that he was tasked by the cardinal then to clean up. A year and a half later, he was found murdered in gruesome fashion. So what really, my uncle's dead. He was one of my best friends, and obviously back then it was terrorizing. There's no words to put it, especially when you begin to understand what led to the murder. But what really, Joe, alerted me is, I think, what alerted probably millions of other deliberate Catholics, and was the lack of the response from it was Vigano's first letter as the Apostolic Nuncio in 2018, in the midst of the scandals, the Pennsylvania grand jury reports, McCarrick's depravity, the seminary abuses in Chile, Honduras, etc., when there was utter silence, even in the aftermath of the letter, to the infestation of, as I mentioned, Joe, in the Crisis article, of active clergy homosexuality. When there was silence, rather than an attempt by bishops to say, hey, the jig is up. We didn't clean it up in 2002. We didn't clean it up in 2018. So we're going to make a sackcloth and ashes sort of penitential movement towards begging you, the laity, for forgiveness, for your mercy. We're going to commit ourselves to a yearly holy hour where we expose our shame. And when there was silence, that's when I, with millions of others, laity, I would say, just said, this thing will never get better until it's brought to the fore. And I believe, Joe, I'll close here, I believe that Bishop Strickland is now no longer the Bishop of Tyler because he took it on in 2018. He took on Father James Martin and the embrace of him by many cardinals and bishops into the diocese. And when he took on, he questioned bishops in allowing McCarrick to continue to soar in his trajectory throughout the church when they knew of his decades of malevolence. When Bishop Strickland took this on in 2018 at the meetings, I think this was when the headsmen first began to gather.
Yeah. And you start there actually in your article by talking about Monsignor Jeffrey Burrill. And you apparently had gone back to look at that clip of Bishop Strickland standing up and making his statement, calling for an investigation. And you witnessed Monsignor Jeffrey Burrill make a tell. You call it a tell. Tell me about it.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, Joe. When I was reviewing the Bishop Strickland's, I think really a beautiful 4-minute and 20-second, humble rebuke of fraternal correction to the bishops about McCarrick. I saw at the very last frame, after a pretty hearty round of applause, Monsignor Burrill looking back into the sea of bishops and Bishop Strickland, and he was the one. I just said, oh my gosh. I just shook my head and I stared. I said, yeah, that's him. That is him. And he's the one who the Pillar had discovered through pretty extensive reporting had sought for at least 3 years per an app, a grinder app, to participate in a homosexual lifestyle with strangers throughout the country. Wow. And he was the one in 2018 as a secretary of the USCCB really tasked to go about trying to remedy this situation with the Pennsylvania grand jury reports and McCarrick's depravity. Instead, he was in bathhouses. It was proven he was in gay bars. So now Monsignor Burrill, for your viewers who don't know, they'll be scandalized. Now he's not only not been punished, but he is now back in a parish as an administrator, leading a parish after 3 years of. You can only guess, Joe. I don't understand the diabolical, but you could imagine in that lifestyle where you repeatedly are hunting down things that are depraved. You can only imagine how the devil works there. And I don't know how 8 months of prayer or 10 months of prayer or really 20 years of prayer ever removes in a certain way. Obviously, you make penance and you recover, but how do you get rid of the memories of what's involved with that sort of lifestyle? Well, I don't know, but now I know he's leading a parish.
Average everyday Catholic is growing more and more concerned. And what you just said is yet another example of the obvious injustice in the system that Catholics are experiencing and throwing their hands up and saying, what is going on here? How does Rupnick get a parish after he actually molested religious women? They complained to the Pope himself, and this guy gets a pass. How does Burrill get a parish after all that he has done? But we see Cardinal Mueller gets retired, Gonswein gets retired, Burke has no job now. We see Bishop Strickland getting retired, the bishop in Puerto Rico got retired, and there's a growing list that just get retired, but these other men seem to get a pass. That's an obvious infraction, but are they just being tone deaf? Is the lobby just that strong, Kevin Wells?
Yeah, the lobby's just that strong, I believe. I'm just one Catholic man. Joe, just to be straight here, I write books and articles about noble things. I want to sort of lift the spirit closer to God. But yeah, we live in a disturbing time. It's sort of a black aura, like this black aura has covered our church. Yes, it's. As I wrote about in the article, Joe, we have an inordinate amount of active clergy homosexuality. I know this as a journalist. I travel the country where I give talks, and I don't pursue this subject. I'm speaking to priests and seminarians. I'm speaking about, I think, beautiful things, Our Lady, the sacraments. But off to the side, I've talked to too many priests who freely, I don't know why, maybe they for some reason trust me because it's off the record, but they freely share with me in their diocese how horrible the stain of active, and again, I emphasize the word active homosexuality among the priests in their diocese is. Now, obviously, Joe, you and I both know that in certain dioceses, it's clean, it's scrubbed clean, it's good, but in many and too many, it's not. So why is it allowed to happen with Burrill and Rupnick? And why is McCarrick not in jail? Why does Bransfield, why is he still allowed to present himself as a bishop in certain areas after his proven depravity? I think because there's a tolerance for it. There's a tolerance. And if you're going to be like Bishop Strickland and you're going to tackle it, then you will be beheaded as John the Baptist was. Why was John the Baptist beheaded? Because he was drawing too close to the truth. He was speaking of Herod's sin.
Let's not forget, McCarrick, along with the Archbishop of Washington, D.C., Archbishop Gregory, back in, what was it, the early 2004 maybe, they did the Dallas Accord thing. They were tasked with fixing this sexual abuse crisis that was coming out of Boston back in the early 2000s. McCarrick was in charge of that. And he worked with Archbishop Gregory to come up with the plan that now requires everyone to go through a certification course on protecting God's children and all this other stuff. And yet McCarrick turned out to be the bad guy. And just like Burrill was in charge of seeing to this, and he turns out to be the bad guy. I mean, how many times do we have to learn that lesson, Kevin Wells, before we finally get it straight? It just seems, it boggles the mind. It just boggles the mind. And for me, and for many, In Catholic media, it was the McCarrick thing that was the straw that broke the camel's back. Hey, Kevin, welcome back. What was the response to your article from, like, say, Clergy? What are they thinking and saying about all this?
Man, Joe, I'm glad you asked that. So you never know when you write an article that is, the article is pretty hot. I don't think it's uncharitable, but it's pretty hot. It exposes some realities in the church. Well, Joe, I would say well over a dozen, maybe 24 priests, a few theologians, a few bishops, and some pretty big Catholic names in the country. This is throughout the country. Contacted me through whatever, email, text, phone call, and said, thank you. So my thought is there's going to be, anger or fear or sadness, but no. There was thanks for opening it up. Thanks for shining a light on something that is reality.
Yeah. Yeah. Praise be to God. You have to shine the light of Christ into the dark spaces, but too many in the church today, they just want everything to go, everybody to play nice with each other. Don't ever rock the boat. Don't say anything scandalous. I mean, I could tell stories about the passive aggressive language being used by certain members of the hierarchy to people like me. I mean, almost directly to me, telling me, stop it, just go along to get along. Always show the united front. Always say the happy-go-lucky things. Never air dirty laundry in public. And yet, if I did that, Kevin, and I'd like to get your take on this, if I did that, what would change? Would any of the rot go away?
No, Joe. I mean, if whether through reporting or through our gut or through this sensus fide that sort of rises up in us, says there's this black aura in the church. If we don't oblige Mary, Our Lady, and sort of abate her tears and work for Jesus, who spread out on the cross, who suffers through this enormity of sin in the church, if we just kind of go along to get along, then, I might lose my soul. I might go to hell. So
Exactly.
I can't sort of contracept what I know to be true. I can't put a straitjacket on what I know. This isn't conjecture. This isn't like something that just seems in the ether. This is what I know as a journalist from many priests and bishops who have told me, Kevin, this is a reality. And if I go along to get along, then shame on me.
Amen. Amen. Well said. Who's Monsignor Esif, and how does he play into all this?
Monsignor Esif is a 95-year-old exorcist and mystic, was Mother Teresa's confessor for 7 or 8 years overseas. And back in the 80s, Mother Teresa said, hey, I challenge you to go back to America because you're a holy one, John. You're a holy one, Monsignor, and I want you to form priests. So Monsignor Esif went back and began to travel from seminary to seminary to seminary, giving seminary retreats, forming the priest as Mother Teresa directed him to. And he began to see back then that seminarians weren't praying, seminarians weren't Marian, seminarians really weren't Eucharistic. And he said, yeah, well, if you're anti-Mary, you're anti-prayer and anti-Eucharist, you're of the demonic. And he began to see seminaries as sort of what he says, the sick womb of Holy Mother Church. And if you were a strong and deliberate, intentional man who wanted to be a strong John Bosco or Colby, you were going to be aborted in that womb. But if you were malformed or you had a same-sex attraction or you had this way to you that was unlike, sort of that strong man, you were going to be promoted and pushed forward. And Monsignor Esif saw for a few years that seminaries had a large homosexual population. And when he would present this to rectors, what he suspected, because he's a man of God, he's going to say what he suspects. He oftentimes was sort of politely rebuffed. Well, thank you, Monsignor. We didn't come for your opinions. We came for your prophetic voice. So this is, I think, sort of how it works. There has to be a linear symmetry here. There has to be. You need to see how it worked. So this is from a holy man of God who laid it out. And those seminarians from the 80s and early 90s, those are today's priests.
Yeah. How troubling is that? I know personally, I've talked to many men who have shared their experiences of going to seminary only to being confronted by the homosexual lobby there and then being disgusted by it and leaving. And you mentioned that in your article, that it was the good men who were leaving and not. This is utterly bizarre. And I know our good friend Paul from Buffalo right now would love for me to bring in Bella Dodd in all of this. It does seem like the communist infiltration has taken root in the seminaries of our country.
Yeah, now, Joe, I think you and I both know, and I certainly know this, that seminaries have greatly improved. I've been asked to go to seminaries throughout the country and give presentations and half-day retreats, et cetera, and these guys are on fire, truly. Rectors know at this point that they're in trouble if they allow a certain element in. So there is great hope for the church. And Joe, you and I must say that you and I know dozens of good, strong, holy priests. So we speak generally of this stain on the church that is out there. But there's a war now. There's a war right now for these young guns who are coming up that really, they're desirous of martyrdom because they know the church is suffering greatly. There's this war of the old guard and this new guard. So you wonder why there's this stamping out of this proposed stamping out of orthodoxy or rigidity or backwardism. Oh, they're in love with their cassocks. No, these guys want to fight for God. So this war is going on within our church right now. The young priest, the young guard with the old guard, and we're in the thick of it. And we got to do whatever we can to fight for God during this time.
Amen. Amen. We need those good priests and good bishops to find that courage and to stand up and defend Holy Mother Church and the clergy themselves too. And I think that was what Bishop Strickland was trying to model. And unfortunately, he has not been removed from his diocese. But we need these men to stand up. So in the last couple of minutes that we have with you, Kevin, what would you say the average laity ought to do about all of this? What can they do about the rot within the church?
Well, I always propose to start at the grassroots in your own parish. Speak to your pastor about it, and off to the side, set up a meeting, and be very frank. Please don't sugarcoat or soften what your heart urges you to say. Be very frank and ask him questions. Joe, you talked earlier about the tell, the famous tell in a poker game. Oftentimes, I'll tell you, Joe, you'll see a tell. And I believe if you see that tell where there's some, I don't believe in it, Kevin, you're too zealous, or it's time to leave that parish, because it speaks to me that maybe he's part of that underworld in a certain way, or he's covering up, or he just doesn't have the courage to take it on. So speak to your parish priest. If that doesn't work, then try and set up a meeting with your bishop. And I mean this, really. If it lives in you, write a letter, obviously charitable, but Your Eminence, Your Excellency, I'd like to meet with you to just share some concerns. So really just reach out to your pastor, your bishop, and just ask him questions. Kind of like the reporter, just ask questions and hear what the response is, and then challenge him to be a hero.
Yeah, do the Columbo thing. Get a cigar out, just ask questions. Yeah, see how that goes.
Yeah.
Did you like that video? It's okay. You can admit it. It's perfectly fine. Hey, we cover the big stories of our day, from inside the church to outside the church to all points in between, and we do it from a Catholic perspective. It's called A Catholic Take. It's a radio program Monday through Friday. We live stream it right here on this channel, by the way, so make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We would be very grateful to you. And don't forget, you're going to want to watch this video right here because you don't want to miss anything.